So our last one, again, looking at concept of trails this year, and I think most of you have been here for most of the talks, but starting out looking at some of the trails experiences of thinking about trails as a path through life circumstances. So looking at trail experiences of new immigrant cultures coming into Wisconsin, looking at the trails experiences of Ho-Chunk people at the time who were being forced from Wisconsin. Looking at the physical trails last time, looking at the history of the military road. And so today's kind of a unique one, looking at history of a people group with kind of a path through life circumstances that connects here to Portage, but also a lot of other places. And then also kind of a trail of, I guess, discovery for Mary Ellen and finding out this history for the first time. That's history of her ancestors. So Mary Ellen's been a volunteer here for a few years, and originally from Prairie du Chien, licensed counselor by trade.
Yeah.
And looking forward to hearing.
And clean the trails. So, welcome. This has been quite the journey, and I'm still in the infancy of it. But you see in front of you here the Métis stuff. You also see over here the Lakota stuff, because part of my heritage is Lakota. But I'm going to speak to the Métis part, because this has been really a journey that I did not know where this stuff came from or where it was till I went up to Canada this past summer and met some of my relatives, and they were like, oh yeah. So Dad had this stuff and he just gave it to me. So the family background is that for some reason, when I was born, we lived in Bloomington, Wisconsin. Then he moved to Prairie du Chien. Well, going through this Métis stuff, in Crawford County, there is some land that's been donated by the Crowleys, which is part of the Métis lineage, for a park. My relatives are buried in Seneca. I have relatives that had pictures taken in Prairie du Chien. However, we never talked about them. The history was, Dad showed me this this scrapbook, and we were going through, and I said, who is this? Who is that? We don't talk about him. We don't talk about him. And because at this time, and still today, I have at the end a quote for what's going on with the Métis in Canada today, in October. So it was the history was very much, I caught bits and pieces of it when he was alive, and then when I was pulling out this stuff and figuring out what it was like, oh my gosh. And how I got it out, 6 kids, I'll never know, but it was meant to be. So, and it's all unspoken, most of it's unspoken history. However, I did do a lot of research and found my lineage, and we'll talk about the difference between Little Métis and Big Métis. And that's a big source of contention in the Canadian land right now. So it's going to be a mixture of facts and storytelling that I've heard from my family. But in order for you to understand the Métis culture, you have to understand how it all happened and how Wisconsin and the states played a role into the whole concept. Now let's see, there we go. So before 1600, it was all First Nation. There was all First Nation in Canada. It was always known as First Nation. If you went towards the Alaska, up in that area, BC, it would be Inuit. But there were no Métis at this time. Okay? So 1670, the Hudson Bay Company came, established a royal charter. Then in 1700, now here's where you start seeing that the Métis are coming down from the Great Lakes because the trade was there, right? The Green Bay. So they started the mixed breed, which Métis means half-breed. Heritage children in the Green Lakes region began to identify as Métis and began to intermarry, forming communities. And the reason they did that was, think about it. You're coming over from Europe. You don't know the culture. You don't know the roads. You don't know the highways. You don't know the rivers. So what better than to find a Cree person, which that's what they got with, is a Cree. And so it was the Cree and the French Canadian, French British getting together. So the first big thing we have is this battle of 1759. The Plains of Abraham established British control over Canada. Up to that time, it was, now remember, it was First Nation. So, and then they took other parts of New France, which was the Manitoba, where it's at. And then that ended the French claim to the territory. They were no longer able to be there. However, they did try, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Feel free to ask me any questions. I'll be talking about some of this stuff. So, 1811, the Hudson Bay, mind you, the Hudson Bay Company is not a nice company when you really think about what they did to the natives. And so they gave a grant to Thomas Douglas, a Scottish peer, and he got a land grant for 116,000 acres located on the junction with the Red River and the Aspoon, I'm going to say it wrong, river in the Red River Valley to bring Scottish settlers. So when I did my ancestry DNA, I have a lot of Scottish in me. I thought it was German. My last name, my maiden name was Raby, very German. But no, it's 54% Scottish. That's where that came from. And the Métis who were already living there were really refusing to accept the control of the Scottish coming because they feared they were losing their lands and also their inability to trade and provide the income for the fur trading. Now that is what they survived on. That is what they lived on. It's dry fruit, tallow from the buffalo, and dried meat. And that they could keep forever and it would live. But the Métis were also buffalo hunters. So that's important to know. The War of 1812, lo and behold, guess who we have fighting on Prairie du Chien land? The Métis with the British. Now, I've gone through the Villa Lewis. I grew up there. Never heard about the Métis there. Never heard at the Villa Lewis about any of the Indians there, right? They don't talk about that stuff. So that was real interesting. So the Métis favored the British because the British was being more generous with the land. The French, not so much. And that's a big difference in the cultures. So when I got to the War of 1812, I was like, wow, that's what, yeah.
Sorry, can you define pemmican again?
It is the buffalo tallows, so the fat, and then dried meat and dried fruit, and they mix it up, and it stays forever. It's like beef jerky or something like that you would have forever. So they needed the buffalo to make that. I mean, you could make it probably with deer or, but they were buffalo hunters. So, yeah. And then in the 1816 to the 1820s, the Hudson Bay tried to curb the Métis hunting and trading practices. Why? Because the Métis could do a lot better with the money, with this trade, with the bartering, than the French Canadians said the British Canadians could. There was a language barrier there. And then the Métis worked with the Northwest Company to defeat the Hudson Bay Company. However, you see a blanket here, and that would be what they used. That's a Hudson Bay blanket. That was their coat, which we'll talk a little bit about. So, in 1821, the Hudson Bay and the Northwest Company resulted in an influx of Métis and country-born families to the Red River settlement. Now, the country-born relatives are your First Nation. So there's this whole big thing about First Nation versus Métis versus Inuit. So it's still kind of a fight around there. So here is the Red River. So you see you have French parishes, English parishes. My family was with the English parishes. Kind of like if you've been down to Louisiana, they call their little places parishes too. So you can see I did read something where the Métis were down in St. Louis, but didn't get enough time to explore that. That wouldn't be my heritage, but this is important to note when we're talking about how I can claim that I'm Métis, because it's not through blood, because that won't show. So that's the important thing. Okay. In 1881 and 1885, they built the railroad. Okay, to Ontario to British Columbia, leading to an influx of settlers. So we have more settlers coming, taking away their land, taken away without permission. Of course, that's very common in any of the native tribes. And without it, when they came and took that and did the railroad, the Métis really felt that they didn't have a secure base to claim this land. They had nothing to understand what a piece of paper was and what it was going to mean. So they were encroaching on the land, the new settlers, and they took over in May 6, 1884. The French and the English Métis of the Northwest passed a resolution to obtain Louis Riel. Louis Riel is quite the colorful figure, I would say. Assisted to negotiate their outstanding land tenure grievances with the French government. Louis Riel was in Little Shell Res in Montana. He had escaped the Canadian because he was in trouble. It is known that, or it is storytelling, that he was in the eastern side of the states and in the Midwest. He was also, they say, in a mental institution. Just saying, I don't know, they either call him a prophet or they call him like a lunatic. It depends which side of this thing you talk to. But Louis Riel was one of the biggest guys that came and said, okay, I can do this. He went away, was down in Montana, and then in 1885 he puts forth the provisional government and the drafting of the Bill of Rights. They said that if he was informed that would be met with bullets, and they formed a provisional government. I'll show you a picture of that coming up. But the Duck River was March 26, 1885, the first battle of the 1885 resistance. Now this is important to know who you talk to. It's either a rebellion or a resistance. So it depends what side of the place you're on. And then Superintendent of the Northwest Mountain Police led the corrupt government. And here is my first hint that of a relative that fought with the Red River, for the Red River settlement. Charles Carrier, fourth great grandfather, fought in the 1885. He was a member of one of the 19 units led by Gabriel Dumont. What they said, and this is factual. It came out. There's this whole thing I belong to, but he came out with an arm injury, didn't die, which was unusual because they have a lot. It's hard to know who fought in that. So, given that gives me a right to say, partial right. There's more to it than that. That says that I'm Métis, big M. So. And then in 1885, he put forth the motion to form I went to that one, I'm good. I had that on twice. So, what happened here?
Oh, it's here.
I want okay. There. So, this guy here, John Bruce, is related to me. I have no idea who he is, how he's related, but he is in my family tree. Now, here's the interesting thing. Here's that provincial government that Louis Riel was part of. John Bruce was the president first. He's sitting there going, what did I get myself into? He did not know. And then he was sickly, so Louis Riel took over. This sash here is from that resistance. So that see the black on it compared to the red? So that is, that would be called, they call it the dark times in the Métis culture. He bowed out and Louis Riel probably did take over. And then he was tried for treason. Because what happened was, remember he said he left? Well, before he left, he was part of Parliament. Then they get him back. Then he kills a George Scott, an orange man, and that puts him during this whole resistance thing. And that makes the Canadian people very angry. So what happens is he's found guilty of high treason. The jury asked for mercy, they said no, and sentenced him to death. All the rest of the people that were in that resistance got clemency. So, and then he was executed. And November 16th is a very important day in our history because they celebrate Louis Riel Day. So the interesting thing about this is I was working, I do psychotherapy, and I was working with a client from Arizona, and he says, he's Canadian, he says, oh, and I was telling him I couldn't meet with him today because I was doing, he said, we had to study him, and I said, so tell me what you think he was. Was he a hero or just a prophet? They called him a prophet too. And or was he just like out there? He says, well, what we learned was he was a prophet, but it depends who you talk to. So, but he was executed, and the thing is that they were trying to get an Anglo-Protestant. Most of the Métis people were Catholic because that's where they came over from, the heritage. So, so then. In February 1875, they granted amnesty to everybody except him. And then, here's where we get into the issue of the half-breed scripts in Canada. They were issued by the Manitoux Act S31. It's a act, like a chapter in their government. And they were issued land and money scripts, not money, but scripts for their land. The problem with this is, in order to get that script, they had to travel, like, over to the eastern side of Canada, to the Dominican landholders. So, and they had no idea. Most of these systems, they were just pieces of paper. They meant nothing until we became able to be a nation. Okay, where'd you go again? What's going on here? Oh, I can do it this way.
Okay.
I can do it this way. So, in 1870, the Canadian government recognized the rights of the Red River settlers. So that is where your Métis are, most of them, the big M. In negotiation with Ottawa that spring. But the Red River victory was limited. I mean, they still took the land and stuff. Then they created an act, but severely limited the lands and what rights that the Métis had. Because the Métis are actually Cree women and French Canadian voyageurs. So it means mixed breed, and that's why. But in order to be a Métis member of the nation, you have to have certain requirements, and we'll talk about that. So the Métis land titles, they were guaranteed 6,000, 7,000 hectares, which is only 237 miles that they were going to give the Métis for their land. They've had all this land, the Red River, they've had all this. And they were reserved for the Red River, for the children of the Métis people. However, these were mismanaged. Much like what happened with the Ho-Chunk, right? Much what happened with the Lakota on the Reds and all that stuff. So here we come to the Wisconsin Métis. interesting. This was an unknowing thing that I really didn't expect to find. So the Battle of Seven Oaks near the Red River Settlement, Winnipeg, Grant aligned with the Métis leader and led the Métis and Indigenous fighters. Now the Indigenous fighters would be your First Nation and Inuit, mainly First Nation. And they fought a clash against the Hudson Bay men. This is where the Métis become a nation, a distinct nation. This is where we become who we are. And during the 1970s into the 1980s, May lived near Fur sites. So some were at Fort Snelling, they came to Mendota, then they went to Prairie du Chien, came through Portage. So they went to the Green Bay, then they come down and followed the river, came through here, Portage, and then they would go to Prairie du Chien, go down to Chicago, trade their furs, and then take the train back up to Canada. Now, here's the interesting thing. Many times as I've been through the Ville Joseph Rolette is married into the culture of the Métis. Nobody says that, but you know where his wife came from? Fort Snelling, and she was, what's her name? I gotta look this up because this was really blown me away, I'll tell you. Nina Sturgeons. So she was Métis. However, if you go through the Bill Lewis, they're not going to say anything about that. They will not admit, actually they won't admit to a whole lot of things with the natives there, but the Brisbois house, I don't know if you were here for Mary Antoine's presentation. She talked about that he gave her that Brisbois house to his estranged wife, and that was Ingrid, because she couldn't own the house, but it had to be in a man's name. But he gave her that house. So that was interesting to find. So in 1830, and if you know what, if you've walked out there for the treaties out there that they had for the 1830s for the Ho-Chunk, the Métis had a treaty 1830 in Prairie du Chien. So it was a half-breed, it's called the half-breed tract, and it was a segment of land designated in the western states by the United States, governing especially Métis, American Indian, and European American ancestry, known as half-breeds. Here's where the problem comes in, is because American Indians, you think American, right? Well, Métis were Cree. Their lineage is Cree. So then the government sets aside these tracts that are supposed to be for them in Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. So it's called the beginning of the barn. So if you look at Lake Pepin, and I have a map here that'll show you, the reason, before I go on, let me say that the reason this half-breed tract is you will see that they were excluded. The Métis were excluded from both Native Americans and the European. They were not thought to be either or. We were just out there nomads. I mean, we didn't have anything to give, I guess, but we do. We have a lot to give. But they did this half tract because after the resistance, people were burning stuff. My dad always talked about things being burned. This is all I have left. That this piece here is from 1849. Now, it looks like, if you guys embroidery, it looks like embroidery, right? So that is because the Europeans came over and taught them how to embroidery, and then they took it a step further with their beads. So that's how that came. But they had to have this place, and here's where it comes. So if you look at Hastings, there's Red Wing, you go down, all the way down to Prairie du Chien. And that land, parts of it, is looked at as half-breed. So it was there for the Métis people. No history has ever talked about this. So it's just, and this is something that was like, I was sitting there going, oh my goodness. You know, so I think with everything that Adam's done here and everything, our culture, we're finding out that we're very, very lost it's in infancy. We're just learning about who we are. So, in order to prove that I am Métis, the first thing is self-identify as a Métis. So that means I was recognized and declare myself as Métis. Therefore the dress. And I'll talk about the dress. But if I don't take on this ownership, then the culture's lost, and that's what happened. The other thing is that there had to be a connection to the historical Métis community, which is the Red River settlement. And then the historical proof, that Dominion Land Act, Andre, he had lot 822 at the Red River. So that is my third great-grandmother. So, and then you have to be recognized in a government, church, or community record. I'm on 2 Facebook groups, Red River, that I had to prove my lineage before they let me on. I was going through 2 years ago museum in Whistler, Canada, and I had a mask on, and you know, blonde hair, blue eyes. You guys wouldn't think you think I'm crazy, right? Talking about being any native blood at all. But I have this mask on, and the gal looks at me, the one that's leading the tour. She goes, "You're Métis." I said, "What?" Took me, but I mean, I'm wet. We walked in the rain to this place, and she said, "Yeah, you're Métis." I said, "How do you know?" She said, "The eyes, the way your eyes are, and your nose." And I always said to my mom, am I going to be like my grandma and have long nose and long ears? Because that was part of the Lakota thing. But so, and that meant that the Métis nation, that I can actually go up to them and register. Now, I won't do that because of who I am and age. I don't need that. It's, you know, so here is the family. Gene, he came over in 1638. He was born, he came in about 1650, he was about 20. And he was one of the founders of the government in the Red River, before it was any Métis. Now, you look at this and you don't see, where do you see the first Métis? Right here. But these are all Métis. They just didn't, sometimes they spelt it different. You'll notice the names are spelt different. Here we have 2 different ways of spelling the name. And then we have where we came down to the Crowleys, and then my dad, and then there's me. So it's really, when I looked at this, I'm really not that far away from the heritage of the Métis people. And when I was in Canada, they were all like, "Oh, you're home, you're home." I'm like, "Okay, all right." So, whatever, I'll take it. So, yeah. So, what did they do? Well, the Gene was very instrumental in helping them form a government there. So the government was pretty much founded like from the Europeans. And then they became the backbone of the settlements economy. They were the one to establish trade routes and relationships with indigenous people. So that'd be Gene. Now, one of the interesting things, I didn't put up here, but you know the beaver hats you see everybody in? That was a status thing. Not many people had them. But the beaver, coming here, the beaver's alive and well on on the Fox River there. So they were engaged in farming. The Crowleys, when they came down, they did organic farming. So they were one of the first ones to do organic chicken farming in Iowa. And then they were bridged a culture to the different European settlers and indigenous people. And then he took a role as helping them organize and manage community affairs. So he was involved in the negotiation and trying to settle what they could. So here's that land, that's that piece of paper that says they have land. Doesn't mean anything. All it means is now I could go into the family and say, this is part of my heritage. But that's what they would have to get, and then they would have to travel to get that okayed. And then, the problem with that is they didn't know what land they were getting. So they had tracked off all this land, but they didn't know where the land was. So it was like, okay, so that wasn't helpful. And here is where you see the Red River settlement with my family. So this is the piece of paper I would take. I would take that other one. I would take my lineage that I just showed you and take it into the government and to the Métis Council and say, can you approve me for it? So, very interesting. So here is my relative. She was born in Ontario, Canada. Look at her dress. So I am dressed very, very similar, but I am also dressed with Lakota stuff on. This is something I made because in order to, when they first came, they were in the buckskin. They were in the leggings. They weren't in this kind of dress, that ribbon skirt. So, and she was buried in Winshek County. But they migrated down here because they thought it would be a better, safer place for them to be. So, and so who are they? So they're indigenous nation from Canada from the 17th century. In order to be Métis, you have to speak the Métis language, which is French and Cree together. Okay? So it is not, it's a very different language. I don't know it. I wouldn't even try. So they cultivated their distinct way of life, their culture, clothing, artwork, music, and dance. The difference, Métis, the small m, is a mixture of French, which can be used with any First Nation people. Okay, so we could have a Métis there, we could have Inuit, we could have a First Nation. But the Métis are the mixed French and Cree only. And they only speak the Métis. So it's that guy that was here, I forget his name, but he says there's a guy at UW-Madison that speaks it. I would like to meet him. So the flag here, this is the Métis flag. And if I hold it like this, it looks like an 8. It's infinity. So it talks about us being one, becoming two, becoming one. And a lot of the things that you see with native stuff is circle, in a circle fashion. This is a bone cup that they have. So that was a gift to me. Most of the stuff is a gift right on. So that's proud to, it means honor and respect. So it was first put up in the Frog Plain in 1816. Okay. Now we get to the religious beliefs. Remember I said about that one they were trying to get that fight, they wanted to be Anglo-Protestant. So most of the Métis were very strict Catholic. That did not exclude them from going to Portage schools and getting their haircut. Mine is in the traditional Métis in a bun, but that did not exclude them from going to border schools and learning the English language. They were common, Ojibwe and Cree, Catholic and Protestant. Many went to Catholic churches and Protestants. The marriage, this is interesting. So on my lineage, it shows that they were married in the Catholic Church, and then they had a traditional Indian marriage. So I'm not sure. My guess, speculation is, in order for acceptance, that was part of the thing that they did. So, and then the language which I talked about was the Métis. It spoke differently depending on where they lived in their homeland. But it's like, if I'm on the Rosebud Reservation and and then Dakota people come, we have a different dialect. Same thing here. So, but it's basically this capital M that for the Métis. Then the Métis clothing. So I'm going to come over here and show you, illustrate a couple things. So I didn't wear my hat, but so I'm going to pretend I'm a trader. So I'm going to take this. I could be a male, female. I'm going to take it and I'm going to wrap it like this, and I'm going to tie it. And then I would be able to carry 90 pounds of fur on both of these. It keeps my hands free. It keeps me from being able to do a lot of things. This they used as a notch this was multi-use. So it could be used as a first aid thing. It could be used as marking the calendar, scarves, that kind of thing. If a guy, so that they would take that blanket and they would cut a hole in it like this. This is one I have. And then the men would take it and wrap it around like this. So now I got my hands free. I didn't have a backpack, but I can certainly put a whole bunch of things in here. I can put my flint, I can put my firewood, I can carry whatever I need. So my hands are free because I need my hands for trading and stuff like that. So these are made of wool. These are from about the 1850s, things I found. And so they would use them for everything, towels. They would also use this, like, let's say let me take this off. Let's say I'm a grandma or mom and you have a rip in your clothes, I would use this thread for sewing. So it becomes a really handy dandy tool that was thought of. The black sash they wore during the resistance, and I can only think that came from my relatives that fought in that. So, so they decorated their flowers, their things with beads, and I'll pass these around so you can kind of feel them. They're kind of neat. But if you look at them, they really have the distinct thing like embroidery. Like, we do embroidery stuff, and they took them and made it with their beads. So, and that's a coat that would be made out of that, the cape coat. So that I found at a museum I was at. I was so excited, came back and told Anna all about it, because right next to here is a Winchester gun that when we were doing the archaeological dig, we found an Winchester cap or something. So, now the ribbon skirt. You see I'm wearing a modern day ribbon skirt, okay? This ribbon skirt is now very different for what it was originally. This was, one of my relatives again. It's heavy, it's very heavy. But here's the original ribbon skirt. Now why they did this was if you saw me dressed like Métis, and you're a European, you're gonna go, oh my gosh. But if I have this on, I'm blending in, all right? So this was in a box that my dad had, wasn't burned, but it's been worn. It's heavy. It's heavier broadcloth than this trade cloth is. So this is something that the ribbon skirts were made to assimilate into the culture. Not like these ribbon skirts. These ribbon skirts are made for Indigenous women that have been missing or killed. If you go to Canada and you go to a park, they will have little teddy bears all over the monuments there, celebrating or grieving the loss of the kids. So yesterday was Indigenous Day, so I wore my black shirt that has the red hand on. And then the other time I have an orange shirt for the kiddos. So, but the ribbon skirt here is, I looked and I told him Adam, that I found it. And I looked, I had the same picture from the Métis, so that's what I knew. So they went from the buckskin over there to the broadcloth that we have here. And they were replacing their hides because they wanted to fit in. They wanted to be, kind of their own culture, but yet very different. And they developed it to the fabric. So what are you going to trade with? I have furs, you have material. We're going to trade, right? Barter. There was no really exchange of money. There was more bartering. So the whole story is that these ribbon skirts were kind of sad because they gave up their hides and their traditional buckskin dress, the Cree women, to fit into the culture, to melt into the culture. So that was their sellout. So we talked about that. So the sash we talked about, they were 300 hours it makes that's finger weaving. I can't do it. I tried. It's very hard. But they first wore it as the French voyagers. If you watch any reenactment that we have in this area, you will see them with the sash. The Ho-Chunk have a sash that I saw out there that they do, but this is from the French Canadians. So, and this became the symbol. The sash is a symbol of our identity. So it is, you'll see us wear it around or across. Oftentimes it's a ceremonial thing that is gifted to somebody. This stuff is just part of what I had. So then the colors. So red is the fighting. So if you look at my thing, it's red. I have black for the dark suppression of the Métis land. So that would be during the Rebellion Act. And then I have white connection to Earth and the Creator. So these are not made by patterns at all. They're just handmade. So that's where the patterns came. Modern day, you'll see a lot of, if you go to powwow or anything native, you'll see us in our ribbon skirts more than in the buckskin. And then typically they wore leggings. I have leggings over there. Women would wear them too in the winter. Men would wear them, and then they wear their coats, and then I told you how they sashed, wrapped it around. It would take them, they'd use it for everything. They had long dresses, a shawl. So this shawl is actually a gift that was given to me. So they might have something like this. Because remember I said it's a melting pot of different cultures. And so you would wear it like this. So this was a gift to me. I didn't make it. Oops. It's hit the floor before. And then the colored beads they would trade for. So those weren't something that were indigenous. They would be something that they would trade for with the settlers. And then the men's clothing were typically cloth or tan deerskin or moose hide. I don't have any moose hide. I have elk hide over there. It's a heavier hide. It's a heavier hide than your deer. The shirts would be brightly colored, maybe in the trades cloth. They weren't the white like you see. Jackets with beadworks. On the feet, woolen stockings with beaded moccasins. So these moccasins are from the Cree. They have no soles on the bottom, so they'd be really hard to do a whole lot of walking with. Leggings or deerskin, those that I made were from deerskin. Hats, that would be like this hat, probably be round, a bigger rim. And then in the winter, they're like parkas, and then they would be made out of this blanket. So they cut a hole in it, and and then the sash would help keep it up. And then the woman's clothing was very much like what I'm wearing. Blouse, I might have some beaded work on here if I had the time and that's a hard bead to do. It's not like what I do on my balloon. A scarf or a shawl on your head. They'd wrap in a blanket. And then they wore dresses that were inspired by native style. But over the time, they became European in appearance. Just because of what was left, too. Remember, the buffalo are gone. So where are you going to get your hides anymore? This stuff that I have is very old. And then they were called the flower beadwork. And I pass that around because it's very different than this kind of beadwork that you see done on the loom. We have in Plains, in Lakota, we have 4 directions. Those are not 4 directions. So it is pretty much, they were known as a flower bead work. And usually you did this stuff in the winter because that's when you were going to be sitting around, right? No TV, no nothing. So, and they would do the beads with the same design. So if I was to pick up something at a store, it would look just like the beadwork I passed around. And so they were very good. That's how they got the nickname of beadwork. They have decorated jackets, bags. They have this octopus bag. It's got like 4 legs down and it's all beaded. But it looks like an octopus, so they called it an octopus bag. I don't know if they've ever seen an octopus, but that's what it's called. And then they would put this on dog sleds, everything. So the next picture I have is an actual Métis dog blanket. So this was at the museum. It was beaded. I'm just like going, my eyes were bugging out when we were going to this museum. She said you could take pictures. That's one thing one thing that's very respectful to ask is to take, if you could take pictures. Because some of the spiritual beliefs, like I believe, if you take my picture, you're taking my soul, my spirit. So it's an honor, but so that's their beadwork, and it's very much like I have there. And then this is their dog sled, made out of canvas, and the dogs were in front of that. And there's your beaver hide. This museum was full figure, full to life. It was beautiful. It was in Banff, Canada. And then the Red River carts. These are interesting. These are very distinct to the Red River settlements. So they were made to carry the heavy animal trains that they couldn't carry on their backs. So they didn't have cars back then, so they invented these Red River carts, and they were tied together with sinew, which is guts, like from the deer. And then the carts made trails between the fur train posts, and they became roads. And they also invented the York boats to go up and down the river. There's an interesting thing about this river, the river cart, they could take these wheels off, and they could also be used in the river. So it was a multi-use kind of thing. So there you see with an oxen, there you see a typical Métis family, tents. And some would have feathers, some would not. And then here's your York boat. So very big, could carry a lot of hides. And the men usually did that. And then the Red River jig. So it's like, if you guys know what clogging is, well, it's a kind of a mixture of clogging. They use drums, they use fiddles, but this is very distinct to the Red River settlement only. That's why it's called the Red River jig. So it's a combination of Scottish, it reminds me of river dancing, the Irish river dancing, because their body's straight. I don't do that dance. I can do the Lakota traditional dance, but I haven't mastered that one. And then they didn't have instruments, so they used spoons, they used whatever they could, stomping their feet, whatever, and they would become, that was their things. They do have contests in Canada for jigging. When I was going through the pictures of my family, I found a fiddle that was from my relatives. I was telling Adam, I was downstairs in my basement purging, and I looked on the rafters there, and there was an old fiddle. And if I would have only known, I was in high school, I didn't really, if I could have just grabbed that, but I got what I meant to have. So they have really big competitions. So the Métis today, this just happened. Brian Mulroney, Prime Minister, visited the Winnipeg, and he recognized the historical Métis Nation and passed a resolution through the House of Commons, recognizing Louis Riel. Now remember I said he was either, out there or a prophet, but he recognized him as a founder and supporting the attainment of the constitutional right of the Red River Métis. And in 2021, that's not that far away, Mulroney he signed the first ever historical self-government recognition implementation agreement for the Métis of the Red River. So they've come a long way, but they still have some ways to go. And then this is the president that just came out. Oh, I missed a slide.
Press the back arrow down
Back arrow.
there. Get the 4 arrows on the lower right of
Oh, we understand so well.
Huh, where'd that one go? Oh, there he is. I'll say that's less. So this is the president. He just came out with this statement today, I just got the newsletter last week, and he said, never forget that we are Red River Métis, the creators of the Manitoba Act 1870, and the people who negotiated entrance into the Confederacy. We are the flower bee people, the Métis. We are the people of the Red River Carts and the Red River Jig. The Red River Métis are the people of the buffalo hunt. The buffalo hunt was very sacred. You didn't hunt unless you had the rights, and they only hunted on Sunday. If you hunted after that, not pretty. Who wrote the laws of the prairie. Be proud of your heritage and celebrate. And then this last one is my relative, and he wrote this book. It is quite intriguing. And he starts it out with a vision quest that he went on. And so I contacted him on Facebook, and I said, Martin, are we related? And he says, we're probably cousins. So I said, okay, we're cousins. And I looked it up, sure enough. So he wrote the Carrying the Chalice Forward, and it's all about hidden stories. Like, remember I said in the beginning, it's hidden stories and factual, and he passed down from generation. And this is from his book. The responsibility and accountability the Métis hold to all their cousin nations from east to the west, so we're talking about whole Canada, is the real inheritance of the Métis. Uniting all families where they are, from knowing Métis families or from others that hold full Métis status, or families that have non-status. So he's saying that they can be non-status. Our families we're just rediscovering our roots of the Métis, and who stand strong with the Métis together is the beginning of our reconnection to the full Métis family. So that's who I am. That's where I've come so far on my journey. I'm looking forward to continuing the journey and finding out more. But I am truly a mixture of cultures. So you can look at the beadwork and all that stuff, and the Métis stuff. So thank you for coming. I hope that I gave you some information, and any questions, anything you have, I can try to answer, but probably won't be able to. Yeah.
Obviously, it's very cold in northern Canada there. Wouldn't they have something to keep their heads warm, the men and women?
They would use the hats.
But the hats, they wouldn't cover the ears.
Yeah, but you
would
would put the sash around it.
Oh, okay.
So you would put the sash around. if they were well enough, they would wear the beaver caps. With the beaver caps were really warm, but the woman, I've never seen a woman in a beaver cap. So, and this Hudson Bay thing is very heavy. So once you put it on, you're going to be sweating. So it gives you, and you would have arm movements there. So I wear this pin. I don't know if you can see it. It's for this was given to me for the women that have died, and then my medicine pouch, which is just mine. I've collected it from 1989, and I've had surgeries with it, and they've let me have it in the surgery room with me. So they recognized that I was Native, and so that was kind of interesting. So, yeah, so that it's been it's so convoluted how I just read today the small M's are going against the big M's, and that's not what we need to do. We need to just embrace who we are and look at what each of us can give. I mean, it's amazing. So my husband started me on this, so it's all his fault. He did our genealogy, and he said, by the way, do you know your Métis or Métis or I said Métis? So yeah. But he will go to a powwow. I'll be dressed, and he'll sit there in his cowboy hat and cowboy boots and just sit there. I'm like, oh boy. So, yeah. And I make good fry bread. Bangkok bread is the Métis we call it, but it's actually flour and baking powder and warm water. But you gotta remember that when they got these commodities, they were rancid. So they cooked, yeah. So I mean, there's just a whole bunch here, but it's an interesting culture. But it's interesting to know that the Métis were in Portage, all around here, and never identified. So.
Would that be because people ignored them, or because they wanted to kind of stay under cover?
I think probably because after the resistance is when I'm picking up that half-breed act, was they tried to simulate into, yeah, because they didn't know if they were being, remember I said only Louis Rael, but the others got clemency, but Dumont lived back here in the States, and he had no children, neither did Rael, and people say they're descendants of them. They could be cousins, but they had no children. So they tried to simulate into the European as much as we could. That was my take on it. But yet they could keep their own identity because of all the Red River stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, just one more.
Yeah.
When the Métis intermarried with the French and the British, who were sometimes Protestant and Catholic, did some of that religion or Christian become adopted by some of the Métis and the other groups?
So that's why I said that the marriages were sometimes Catholic and then they were Native.
Okay, yep.
So they would be Cree, because sometimes the Cree elders wouldn't accept the Catholic. I mean, there's a big thing about, the Catholics who ran the boarding schools. Nuns and priests and, and so they're, but they would do double marriage. My husband and I did a 10-year vow renewal, and we did a Native ceremony. So we did a giveaway. I made dream catchers for everybody, and then he and I did a giveaway. But all the money we made went to 2 horse rescues. So, and Pastor Dick did the prayer, but he's Dakota from Lutheran, and so I'm Lakota. He said, so are we going to have a problem here? I said, I don't think so. Because they, tribes fight among tribes, so, yeah. So you're welcome to come up and look and feel this stuff, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.